I wanted to start talking about movement formation, and we had such formidable minds and hearts and people who were practicing, civil resistance and forming the movement. So I expect that those people will contribute to that session as well. And I want to start from this picture. And I'm sure that Dalia is recognizing this. So Dalia, what is it? Tell us.
Okay, one of the ministers said basically that the chances of an uprising happening in Sudan is as possible as someone licking their elbow. So during the protest, one of the Fridays was called licking the elbow, and then everyone was licking their elbows as a way, yes, we can do it. So
Exactly. So, the revolutions or rise of the movement or rise of the resistance oftentimes seem as if it was impossible. 6 months before December events in Tunisia in 2011, no one thought that those events will happen. The people would think that Arab Spring is impossible until really it happened. I remember even Egyptian activists saying that fighting with the dictatorship is like defying a gravity. It's something impossible. But if you imagine that those dictatorships are already upside down, then perhaps you can indeed defy gravity. The dictatorships, I think, they contain the seeds of their own destruction and the seeds of their own negation. There are a number. So if for example, passivity and apathy dominates the psychological, mental, emotional state of the society, we think that those kind of feelings are insurmountable. They cannot be broken. They cannot be changed. And then that kind of overwhelming feeling reinforces only the apathy and fear. And then when finally the revolutions happened, we think, looking at those revolutions, looking at those upheavals, we think that they were inevitable. And the fall of the regime that followed those revolutions was actually predictable. And so this is kind of another extreme, another view of the movement emergence. And the explanation that oftentimes is offered, for example, when Tocqueville was analyzing French Revolution, he was saying that French Revolution happened because of the weakness of the regime, because monarchy was not able anymore to repress effectively or control effectively the people. And this oftentimes is referred as a kind of post factum fallacy, that we tend to analyze the rise of the resistance, the rise of the revolutions, the rise of civil resistance from today's knowledge or today's eyes. So we know now that the regimes were weak, but neither activists nor even those regimes realized how weak they are when the revolution was taking place. Oftentimes activists were believing strongly that they are facing a very brutal regime. They were afraid, and they actually were not certain that they can succeed. Now, another interesting, I think, approach to explanation of why civil resistance happens is the kind of more structural approach to the events, which I think underappreciates the skills, the actions of the agency. And that was particularly visible in the studies and articles and writings published by so-called experts, regional experts, after Tunisia happened and Ben Ali fled, which was by mid of January 2011, and revolution in Egypt hasn't yet started. And there were a number of articles, which you can easily find out online, saying that the revolution in Egypt is actually not possible. Or even if it's possible, it would not be successful. Or even if it's successful, it will not be as quick as it was in Tunisia. And then, in order to explain the readers why those revolutions were not possible, or why that revolution in Egypt was not possible, or couldn't be so quick and couldn't be so successful, they were emphasizing a number of structural factors. They were saying that society in Tunisia was more homogeneous. It's much greater polarization between Christians and Muslims in Egypt. That Tunisians were more educated. That the illiteracy rate of 20 or 25% in Egypt is much higher than in Tunisia. That middle class in Tunisia was greater, and they somehow already associated the economic needs, and they were longing for political change. Egyptians are still struggling to satiate the economic needs, and they are not yet prepared to fight for the political rights. Tunisia, and Ezzeddin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, has a rich tradition of the labor organizing, and the first trade unions in Arab world were set up after the First World War in Tunisia, and that tradition doesn't exist in Egypt. So the trade unions are not so effective there. And then access to internet, that because of the middle class, because the kind of greater openness of the Tunisian to the world, they have more information what is out there, so they can compare what they have, which means what they didn't have, and what others had, and that's kind of brought the resistance to the fore. Egyptians had much more restricted access to internet in comparison with Tunisians at the beginning of 2011. And then Egyptians were living still in the pharaoh complex. They were, they could even agree to the hereditary rule that Mubarak was proposing to them, because they had in their DNA pharaohs. Tunisians, of course, didn't have that. And then catalytic event that happened with self-immolation of Mohammed Bouazizi, well, we couldn't see much. Since Tunisia wasn't such a catalytic event for Egyptians, there wasn't nothing kind of coming in terms of Egyptian rising. And that's, I think, showed clearly, because we know that the revolution happened. We know that the revolution in Egypt was successful. And we know even that revolution lasted 17 days instead of 28 days, like it was in Tunisia. So, and the major really point is here that there was not much focus on the agency, what ordinary people were doing since 2003 in Egypt in terms of gaining learning experience, how they organized, gaining experience from their failures of organizing that time, and preparing for January 25th, 2011 in a much more sophisticated and strategic manner than in previous years. That hasn't been kind of analyzed in those articles. Now, I wanted to come up with a conceptual framework for how I understand the growth of resistance and growth of a movement before trying to explain the triggers, I think, for the movement formation. First of all, I think the first stage is the rejection of the status quo. And that rejection can happen through activities that are not seen by the opponent, by the adversary, as being political. They usually are actually very apolitical activities focused on developmental work, on social work, on education. In Zambia, for example, that is the case that is explored in my edited volume, Recovering Nonviolent History, and some of you already picked up the book. We'll have more copies coming. The authors are looking into the role of so-called welfare associations in Zambia at the beginning of the 20th century in resisting British occupation. But those welfare associations were set up, first of all, to address the issue of health, of sanitation, of education, of delivering social services. But they also, so they were seen by the British as being kind of benign type of self-organization of the Zambian society. But actually, this type of activities raised the awareness of the population, and eventually were responsible for the emergence of more politicized type of actions. And then the second stage which I called is defiance. And that stage involves much more perhaps open confrontational type of activities by individuals and groups that we oftentimes refer as small acts of resistance or cultural defiance. And those actions could be associated with, for example, under occupation, wearing a national type of clothing, or wearing a pin that identifies us as a kind of community, our identity, and illustrating the resistance against the occupier. It could be the recitation of the poetry that is banned, singing the music that is forbidden, the songs that are forbidden. And finally, actually, that's kind of the graph that illustrates the kind of progression. It's more conceptual. Oftentimes those phases are overlapping each other, but the most important thing is that they may last actually for decades and centuries before they would reach the last phase of resistance, which would be mass-based, which would be much more confrontational, relying on direct collective actions, strikes, boycotts, protests, in addition to the actions that we would call as small acts of resistance or cultural defiance. And they may last, usually they would last a shorter period of time, years, months, or weeks or days, in contrast to the previous phases of kind of conscientization in the face of rejection and defiance that is taking place. They would, as I said, they would shape the kind of identity of the group, and they would help the group master the skills of organizing and of resistance. And then growth of a movement. It's for me, the movement starts oftentimes from what I would call dissent movement or dissident movement. There are few, usually there are few people, oftentimes leaders, community leaders, intellectual leaders that are defying the authority and at the same time setting the ground rules for the resistance. They would oftentimes define that we are struggling here using peaceful means. They would define who we are, what we want to achieve, and how. So they would set those grand rules for waging the struggle. And then this is the emergence of a more spontaneous, oftentimes, resistance that I would call protest movements. Oftentimes those movements are raised by emotions. They would not spend so much time planning and organizing, so the discipline is oftentimes quite fragile in terms of maintaining nonviolent discipline. They may not be so sophisticated in terms of conceptualization of what they want to really achieve and how. They might think in the short term, what we want to achieve tomorrow, after tomorrow, not what we want to achieve in a year or 2 or 5 years. And finally, this is the ideal state of what I would call political movement or civil resistance movement, where there is a great understanding of what that movement wants to struggle, not only in short term, not with the immediate repression, but what the movement wants to build after the repression is gone. And the society has to be rebuilt or transformed. And usually, so the progression is from the level of participation, from the few to mass-based, and from the level of organizational infrastructure that would eventually include, for the political movement, would include networks, associations, the kind of alternative institution building, and then engagement in the direct form of actions with clearly defined political goals. And this type of mobilization, because it's focusing on participation and building infrastructure, organizational infrastructure, I would refer to that type of mobilization as more physical and material. So on one hand, growth of a resistance, which is actually much more ideational, much more norms-based, and growth of a movement, which is much more organizational in the contrast to ideational. However, both, they could overlap. And this is not a clear-cut distinction. This is just to help us conceptualize the analysis of what the movement formation is, which in my view, it takes both the resistance part and the movement part in terms of arising the opposition towards oppression. So there are three basic dilemmas that movement makers are facing. We really don't know whether people who we are trying to mobilize, they are sharing our grievances. Oftentimes there is problem with the information sharing. There is censorship. We may know what our neighbors think, but we don't know what people in another village or another town think about specific grievances. And then even if we know, even if we've got a sophisticated network of people that we work all over the country, and we know that what people are dissatisfied with, we don't know whether people will really come out and will join us if we decide to engage in more direct actions. And then we of course don't know whether those actions, even if we undertake them, even if we are successful in bringing people to the streets, whether those actions will be successful. So the dilemma is for the analysts as well as for the practitioners, how the resistance grow, how does the resistance grow and movement form if risks, costs, and uncertainties, and even grievances remain kind of constant. That there is a lot of that the movement or the individuals can lose, a lot of cost that can be inflicted, and the question is, how exactly that movement emerges in those conditions. And I think that there are a number of triggers for the resistance action. Well, it's not enough to take the pill. I think that would be the red pill. So if you take the blue pill, that's what you will have, 12 more years of Putin rule. That was one of the posters used during the Russian popular revolt in December 2011. Well, it's not enough to take that red pill to know the truth and to win the struggle. And I identified 5 factors that I think are important triggers for the growth of the movement or growth of resistance. Emotions, discourse, philosophy of living, strategic planning, and regime behavior. And the time permits, I hope to go through all of them, or at least through the first 3. So first of all, the emotions. So I prepared a little exercise for you. So here we've got a scenario. The building is on fire. We are bystanders. And suddenly a couple of teenagers came out to the window, to the windows on the top floor, and they are shouting and screaming for help. And suddenly one of us decides to run to the building and to come to rescue. And others are in their places. They are just watching. So my question is, what motivates, that is the question to you, what motivates the person who decides to come to the rescue of those trapped teenagers? And what motivates other bystanders actually to wait and remain inactive? So maybe we can start from the person who starts running to the rescue of those teenagers. So what are the possible motivations and emotions that that person exhibits at the time of his or her decision? Yes?
Closer personal relations?
Yes, that he knows or she knows the people who are there, and so there is certain affinity between him or her and the people who are trapped. Mm-hmm. Compassion, which could be the result of the fact that they know each other, right? Where those compassion can come from, in addition? Because they are a part of humanity, because I see that they are almost like children to me, right? Maybe it could have been my child even, okay? Right, but then the question is why would they empathize? Because of the values. Mm-hmm. Yes, Lorraine? It's what? Oh, okay. I've been here. I know actually how to do things because I know I may know that I need to grab a wet rag and put on my face to protect myself. I had a bit of experience of doing this. Yes. It's what? Altruistic. So this is who I am. If I don't act, I won't be. I'm not a human if I don't act.
With myself.
Yeah, exactly. Adrenaline. Yes, it's like this is the action I should be, right? This is the best risk in town, and I am in place. All right. So yes, they could have been my daughter or son. That's what you said. They could be my loved ones. I know those people. I would not be able, to look into the eyes of my friends, family, if I didn't come to the rescue. So the feeling of guilt, if someone else did that, I would feel a bit embarrassed. So let's be the first. The right thing to do. That's something that they kind of. Maybe I'm sick, and the doctors don't give me much time, so I have nothing to lose. Anyway, maybe I will at least save a couple of people, and then, some of them are there for glory. It reminds me of Ivan, who was saying, why he and others joined the resistance against Milosevic, and he said, well, we sought glory. We wanted to tell our children what we did. Even if we were not successful, we could tell our children that we were heroic in this battle. And that battle was uneven, that's why we were unsuccessful, but we took the challenge. And this best risk in town. And we believe that actually I've got the right skills. I was there maybe, I did experience those things earlier. And I can be of help. What about those who stayed behind? What would be their emotions and feelings?
Fear, representation, panic.
Fear, and that would kind of place them in the ground. They are so panicked that they cannot move.
Like shared responsibility, others are doing it.
Right, okay, we see already that guy running. Let him do that. Okay, why not? Okay. It's what? Indecision. But that indecision comes, what is the root of that indecision? Fear, okay. Selfishness is like, shoot, it's like why I would risk my skin. I'm so beautiful anyway, so. They were in shock. That would be the fear that paralyzed them, right? Perhaps. It's what? But wise, why? It's what? It's what? It's a fire, right? I mean, why would I risk? I mean, I'm probably the wisest here. That's why I. Okay.
Indifference.
Indifference. And why would that be the case?
Not to be involved.
Okay. I don't know how to do that. Let's wait for those firefighters. They really know how to do that, right? I mean, why I would, take the responsibility if I'm just an ordinary person? Greg? Oh, Oscar.
Oscar said maybe it was Milosevic's house.
Milosevic's house. But they were children, they were teenagers. And the Milosevic, shoot, that's what I don't have it here, so. All right, next time in my next presentation, I will add that. All right.
Physically unable?
Yeah, well, yes, so I don't have capability, experience to do that, right, yes?
Anyone have children? I mean, when you've got a family relying on you, you're much less likely to take
Right, I mean, I've got a daughter at home, I mean, come on, I need to go right now do the shopping. Why would I be risking my life? I mean, how I will, feed my family if I'm not, or how my family would survive if I'm not there. Yeah. Michael?
Oh, I mean, they also maybe have something to benefit from the house burning down. Maybe they set the fire, or they'll benefit. Well, maybe they'll benefit in some way. So it's not in their interest then to. They're not acting out of fear or uncertainty or something, but they're acting out of that it's actually maintaining the status quo. They're benefiting from it.
So in other words, as a criminal, you have to be on the side of of what you commit, just to make sure that the building really burns down. Yeah, I don't have that actually. Yeah, good. Равнодушный. Indifference. Okay. Yeah. So fear. Again, I've got kids myself. This is also part, I think, of the fear emotion. Lack of faith in my own ability, kind of hopelessness. Then it's the challenge that overwhelms me. I mean, where do I start? There are, 4, 5, 6 people, and how can I mean, even if already one run to the rescue, I mean, if I join him, I mean, there are only 2 of us. And then it's like, okay, I will join him, but will others follow me? There is a bit of distrust in terms of what others will do, even if I act. Then I don't have appropriate skills, or maybe I don't know exactly whether there is a lift or whether there are stairs in that building. I don't have that kind of knowledge, intimate knowledge of the battlefield where that fire is taking place, and that's why I doubt in my abilities to rescue those people. That's the kind of what I just said, and then waiting also for the firefighters. And they will rescue those people. So certainly, there are a number of, I think, important emotions that are inhibiting our actions, and also a number of emotions that are facilitating our joining the movement and resistance. And there is a group of emotions which I see them as the ones who are, I would call, inaction emotions, like fear, shame, humiliation, despair, as actually containing the seeds of actions. Ironically enough, I think that those type of emotions contain the seeds of action. And for example, with humiliation, Václav Havel in The Power of the Powerless, he was writing that actually people, because no matter how humiliated they are, no matter how deprived they are, they have a sense of humiliation. They feel that's humiliation. And from that kind of sense of humiliation, that's where the longing for dignity comes. And that's where the resistance is born. So he was actually saying that humiliation contains the seed for something which would bring people to action. In terms of fear, and I had that discussion with Darren, and we both thought that, if I ask you to name, just think, don't say it out loud, but think about injustices that are there in your country, about the examples of injustices. And then if if you think about them, you may just, list them as facts. Someone was killed, someone was arrested, something wasn't published because of censorship, and so on and so on. The list is long, and we all know about those injustices. But then if I ask you, how do you feel about them? This simple question, how do you feel about them? Oftentimes, when you have that question, the anger, rather than the fear, rises in you. Because it's just common sense telling you that this is just unbelievable. Who we are to suffer those injustices? Are we animals? Or are we humans? And I think that in that sense, there is really a thin boundary, oftentimes, between those emotions that are deactivizing us and emotions that are activizing us. There is another group of emotions that they prevent us from action, denial, which is oftentimes associated with propaganda, indoctrination. And the tool for kind of turning that type of inactivizing emotion towards enabling emotion is knowledge, is sharing information, it's breaking that propaganda. And then there are emotions on the side of inactivism, self-interested, mistrust, apathy, that I think I would associate them with, they are probably the strongest emotions that prevent the action from taking place. And they don't contain the seeds of action in themselves like the ones that are in red color. And I think that oftentimes those emotions, those inaction emotions, are turned into activizing emotions if people see that others are doing something. So me being self-interested, if I suddenly see the network of mutual aids, when let's say intellectuals are collecting the funds for the protesting workers, showing that solidarity, my emotion of being disinterested or just self-centered might actually change by the examples of others. That mistrust might turn into solidarity when people show to me that they are already building that solidarity. The same thing is with the apathy. There was so much energy, positive energy released when on January 25th, 2011 in Tahrir Square, 30,000 people came. And that energy activized those that were still in the state of apathy, staying at home, and then on January 28th, 3 days later, during the Day of Rage, 70,000 people came to the square, twice as many. But the people had to see others in order to break that apathy. And we can come back to the emotions. So that's kind of emotions. Then the second kind of trigger, I think, of the resistance and the movement is what I would refer to enabling discourse, what Jack would refer to as unifying proposition. And Jack quoted and referred to that the proposition that Gandhi in his writing came up with. And I've got a couple of others, and I will just list them here. Those enabling discourse, it's identifying and identifying the injustice quite clearly. The British ruling for their own benefit, Poland as a workers' country, and workers living in poverty. What kind of workers' country is that? Egypt, we are beggars and thieves. And South Africa, a civil rights movement, because we are blacks, we are discriminated just because of our color of skin. And oftentimes those enabling discourses are proposing a kind of common sense actions. It's like, if this is injustice that is going on, why we should maintain that injustice, why we should help that injustice to go on. In the case of Poland, we should just organize ourselves without challenging the government directly. Let's actually build our own workers' committees and councils to fend for ourselves, to win economic, social, and political rights. And why we need to be beggars and thieves? Let's rebel against this. And similarly, the racism, it's not only confined to the blacks, it's actually an experience, a universal experience that white, black, colored person can experience, can be part of that. So this is the universal struggle. And another element, I think, of the enabling discourse, it's associated with what I would call reclaiming citizenship and renewed patriotism. And you come across when you interview activists or just get different quotes from them when they are in the midst of the struggle, why they are there. Oftentimes this theme of, I'm here to defend my country. I'm actually, I see the dictator almost as a foreign occupier. He became a foreign occupier. He's no longer part of our society, our country. He's destroying that country. It's like one Egyptian said, my country, I'm sorry it took me so long to come to the rescue. And, the display of the national flags, it's also quite symbolic in terms of protection of the country. And they are from different countries, those quotes illustrating this issue of reclaiming citizenship by defending the country itself. So in that sense, it's the dissent and resistance becomes patriotic. This is something different than how the nationalism could be viewed. Nationalism is the obedience to the infallibility of the state. And actually patriotism here is defined as the right and even liberty and obligation to resist that state if that state breaches the rights. And this is also coming from Russia, from the protests. I am a free citizen of a free country. That's why I struggle against rigged elections. And then another element of the enabling discourse, which is, I think, very featured very prominently in when the movements are emerging, is this issue of defending future generations. I'm doing this for my children. I've been living under this dictatorship since I was a child. I don't want my children to experience the same life. And this comes, from different countries, from different regions. I want to give birth to the free children in a free country. That's one of the protest signs saying in Russian, defend future of your children. And then one day she will ask you, Daddy, what have you done when crooks and thieves robbed our country? I remember, the discourse in the Solidarity movement in Poland, when they were asked, those activists, they were struggling in the 1970s, at the end of the 1970s, when the Brezhnev doctrine of violent intervention, essentially to prop up the communist governments, was still alive, coming back from the kind of Hungarian 1956 intervention and Czechoslovakian intervention. And then people were asking, so why you are struggling? It's like Don Quixote against the windmills. And they were saying that we are doing this that even if we don't believe in the victory during our times, we hope that victory will come when our children will grow up. And even if then that victory will not come, if our children will be struggling, the children of their children will be finally free. But in order for the children of their children to be free, we have to struggle right now. We have to do that for the future generations. So then we move from emotions, enabling discourse, to kind of philosophical reformulation. And I will go very quickly over that. Hardy, how I'm doing with the time?
Oh, you have easily 25 minutes or more.
Okay. So in Poland, just to give you a sense of what I mean by kind of philosophy, a different philosophy emerging that facilitates the movement emergence and resistance formation. In Poland in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, after failures of three violent uprisings against the powers that partitioned Poland, and there were three powers, Prussia, later the German Empire, Tsarist Empire or Russian Empire, and Austrian Empire. So those three empires divided Polish Commonwealth at the end of the 18th century, and since then Poles, being very kind of fighting like people, they engaged in three violent uprisings. They also managed to send a couple of people to the U.S. during the War of Independence and win the independence for United States that time. So they were very determined to fight violently. But then in 1863, when the third uprising happened and it ended in failure, Poles kind of started thinking that doesn't lead anywhere. We didn't regain the independence through violence. And a number of intellectuals, being very much influenced by positivism that time emerging in Europe, they actually redefined I think, the tasks that are facing the nation under occupation. And they were saying that they compared the nation to a social organism. They said, we live in a community that is a social organism. Now, what social organism needs in order to flourish, in order to live, in order to survive this kind of hardship? Well, every social organism needs a nourishment. So what kind of nourishment is needed for a nation to survive? And the answer was organic work. That this is developmental work, economic, social work, preserving culture, preserving language, building oftentimes underground networks of schools, making sure the tradition will survive. It wasn't the call for strikes and boycotts and civil disobedience. It was the call for work to make sure that the nation will survive. And in India, the kind of philosophical reformulation, it's actually in the concept of satyagraha, which focus on the new understanding of the power of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi came up with satyagraha precisely because he was dissatisfied with the existing terminology that was describing what he was doing. And he knew about Hungarian nonviolent resistance in the mid of the 19th century against Austrians. If you analyze the emergence of the dual monarchy, Austrian-Hungarian monarchy, that kind of monarchy actually came about through nonviolent resistance by Hungarians. So Gandhi and Hungarians were referring to this type of resistance as a passive resistance. And Gandhi read about this, and he was very dissatisfied with that notion. He said, what I'm doing, it's not passive at all. It's a very active form. It needs a new language. So he came up with the language of satyagraha and defined that kind of new philosophical concept of the people's struggle, nonviolent struggle. And Ghana, just another example of the independence movement, Kwame Nkrumah, the leader of Ghanaian independence struggle, he came up with the notion of positive action, very much influenced by Gandhi, which was essentially composed of three type of elements: political agitation in the form of speeches, declarations, petitions. The second one was alternative institution building, and the third one was collective direct actions. And then another, I think, philosophical kind of shift is on the level of how people are perceived. And people are usually, there is in one moment of the movement emergence, by the movement, by the participants, by the leaders, there is a redefinition of us from those who are victims, those who are powerless, into those who are actually powerful and holding the key to the solution. So usually the starting point is that we are victims, and whatever happened to us is kind of outside of us. It's done by a dictator, it's done by the occupying forces, it's kind of outside. We didn't contribute to that. Oftentimes what happens on this level of dissident movements or this kind of rejection phase that I talked about is the new understanding is emerging that we are actually contributing to that problem through what we do or through what we don't do. And this it's visible in some of the quotes, and you can read that yourself. But this is the shift, that we recognize that our own behavior contributes to that injustice and our own inaction. So from there is actually the step to the liberation, because if we through our behavior contribute to that injustice, that means that if we change that behavior, if we do something different, we may not know yet what, but if we do something different, this would be the key to our liberation eventually. And particularly that was visible in the Alexei Navalny, the Russian anti-corruption activist, who said, no one else will free us but ourselves, because we are part of the problem, no one else. It's not Putin, it's us who are so inactive, and we are the key. And then part of that, I think, of the philosophical reformulation is visualization of us. Those pictures are coming from 2004 and 2008 from Tahrir Square, next to Tahrir Square. The visualization was that there was more police than activists. That visualization couldn't really take place. And that was very discouraging. And then, do you see the contrast? That's January, I think 26 or 27 in Egypt. Where are the police? Right, they are surrendered. This is the powerful visualization that people, get, and that's what oftentimes propels the emerging movement. Visualization in Poland, the Solidarity movement emerged formally in 1980, but visualization of the resistance of the people who we are, Poles always knew who they are. That was the communists, the government, the repressive structures, but they have never were able to identify who us meant. And in 1978, when Polish cardinal was elected a pope, he came to Poland and held open masses attended by millions in the country that was communist secular ideology. And that was the moment when people could visualize themselves. In the same way, Egyptians did very quickly on January 25th, 2011. Finally, the part of the triggers of resistance, it's the strategy. And this is about the injustice that we hear about, corruption, torture, detentions. It's overwhelming. It's the question, where do we start? If everything around us it's about injustice. So oftentimes it takes the strategic thinking and identifying a concrete problem that visualizes the injustice. In the context of the struggle with segregation, that was the segregated lunch counters. That was the one problem that could be tackled effectively and one could show quickly the results. But that represented the general injustice. In the context of the British control over the India, the injustice that symbolized that kind of control was monopoly on salt, on a basic good, on the basic staple that the Indians had to, they had to pay the tax to the British authorities. So defying that law was the resistance against actually British Raj as a whole. And in Poland, the workers' country, where workers couldn't actually organize free trade unions. Poles didn't fight for democracy, they just identify one specific problem, the right to organize free trade union. So they really narrowed down the objectives to show relatively quickly the results. In the Tunisian case, showing the corruption, visualizing the corruption, that's a presidential plane, Ben Ali's plane, that was the bloggers discovered that actually that presidential plane was used by the wife of the president to fly to different capitals in Europe to do shopping for the weekend, despite the fact that there were no official visits by the president that time. So that's a powerful images, and that takes strategizing. I will skip that. How much time again do we have?
Well, the session is supposed to go till 3:30, but we started a half an hour late.
Oh, so 3:45 it
so
will.
why don't you go 3:45?
Yeah. Okay.
25, 30 more.
Okay. So another strategy is to devise the methods that would drive other methods. And the first pictures they come from the Siberian town in winter 2012. And there were the protests by the logo toys that those logo toys were protesting against rigged elections. The Wally was for the honest elections here, and they were promptly arrested by the police and trial. Actually, that went on trial, and there is a law in Russia that essentially the toys cannot protest. But that actually encouraged actions in Belarus. Not with the toys, but with the teddy bears. And you've got a number of teddy bears protesting against censorship and against police brutality. And you even see this poor teddy bear without an eye He was actually, it says that I was beaten up by the police, and where is my eye? And police, please return my eye. So this action actually facilitated the kind of solidarity action by two Swedes. They flew the airplane through the Belarusian territory from Lithuania, and they dropped something over some of the cities in Belarus, and that was the message that that the international community remembers about your struggle for free speech. And of course, they were promptly, the teddy bears were promptly arrested by KGB agents. But that eventually drove other methods. There were the protests in front of the Belarusian embassies all over the world with teddy bears, protesting and expressing solidarity. And another strategy is to identify, and oftentimes that happens almost spontaneously, sympathetic agents that can mobilize other participants. Women of the disappeared. That was kind of that came naturally because those women were demanding to know, where their loved ones are, and Czech talked about this. It could be lawyers, could be artists, musicians, or even children that may motivate others to join. And finally, the regime behavior. Václav Havel wrote, because the regime is captive to its own lies, it must falsify everything. It pretends not to possess an omnipotent and unprincipled police apparatus. It pretends to respect human rights. It pretends to prosecute no one. It pretends to fear nothing. It pretends to pretend nothing. So, in Russia, and Evgenia, you can help me here. They were the results of the elections in one of the regions in Russia, and honest elections, because we have honest elections in Russia. So when you compare those figures and you look at that TV anchor looks very puzzled, and she has a reason to look like this, because when she started summing up all these percentage points, she got 146%. So someone in the Russian bureaucratic apparatus added a couple of percentage points to United Russia, which is the first party, and forgot to deduct those percentage points from other parties. All right? So, of course, that was beyond, ordinary Russians' acceptance, level of acceptance. If you falsify those elections, just do it in a way that we don't see it. Otherwise, it's insulting to our intellect, particularly Russians who cherish, mathematics and statistics as they do. So that's where the movements rise, because of the stupidity of the government. And then, another kind of example of the stupidity of the government. Again, Vladimir Putin is just great for that. So he watched the people who were wearing the symbols of white ribbon and saying, I have to say honestly, when I saw on television several people wearing those things, well, I thought that they were leading some kind of anti-AIDS campaign. Maybe they put even condoms there. And so he said that, they were probably wearing condoms. So then in the protest, the next days, well, it was like, you missed the chance to be silent. That's essentially what it means. You are yourself a condom, and there was, and then even the artists were dressed up as condoms while they were delivering the protest speeches, against Putin. Okay, so we discussed those triggers of resistance: the emotions, discourse, kind of philosophy, strategy, and finally regime behavior. So they would, assess why the movements emerge, why the resistance happened. But then what can account for the emergence of a non-violent movement or resistance? Come on, play the game. You should first. Okay. Well, oftentimes it's the issue what is left. We tried everything. We tried elections. We tried negotiations. We tried violence. and everything failed. So let's try something that we haven't yet done, which is nonviolent resistance. Well, what is available, possible? We have weapons, or we could get them, but we think that actually the best alternative to our struggle is actually remaining nonviolent, and we should try that before actually resorting to violence. We know, maybe through books, through documentaries, through the discussions that we had, through trainings, that is the most effective way to do resistance. So that's why we choose to be nonviolent. And we saw actually what happened to others. Poles in the 70s, they knew what happened to Hungarians in 1956, when Hungarians rised violently against oppression, and eventually that triggered violent intervention by the Soviet camp and defeated the resistance. And that was an important lesson for the Polish resistors. And they thought, so the violence was tried, let's not go that way. Let's try nonviolent resistance. Or we saw how successful nonviolent resistance was in other places. That comes again from the protests in Russia that were referring to Václav Havel. That time actually Václav Havel died in December 2011, and there were a number of posters and quotes referring to Václav Havel, his nonviolent resistance that Russians were taking when they were leading the struggle.